I was just trying to rent out my apartment for a few months. That's it. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. I had accepted a temporary work project out of state and thought renting my place would help cover the bills while I was gone. But when I opened the door with the new tenants, what I saw inside completely shattered me. My sister was standing there, in my robe, while her fiance, who just happened to be my ex, was cooking breakfast in my kitchen. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is May. I'm 28, born and raised in Portland. I've always been careful, organized, the kind of person who labels every jar in the fridge. My little sister Lila was the opposite, wild, charming, the one who always got away with things because of that sweet smile. We were close growing up. I used to protect her, help her with school, even let her crash at my apartment when she needed space from mom and dad. So when I left for my new job a few states away, it felt normal to ask her to check on the place. She promised to keep an eye on it, maybe water the plants. I trusted her completely. Before I left, I was engaged to Owen. We'd been together for 3 years. He was quiet, thoughtful, and the kind of man who always opened doors and brought flowers. Or so I thought. Things had been tense lately, but I figured it was stress. He said he needed time to think about our future, and I gave him space. I didn't know that space meant moving into mine, with my sister. A month later, I got a call from a couple interested in renting my apartment. Everything seemed perfect. I told them to meet me there that Saturday. I even felt a little excited to be back in my old neighborhood. The moment I opened the door, though, something felt off. The air smelled like pancakes and coffee, the kind of Saturday morning smell that should have felt comforting. But then I saw her. Lila was standing in the middle of my living room, hair messy, wearing the pale blue robe Owen bought me last Christmas. She froze. The color drained from her face. And then I heard a man's voice call out, "Hey babe, you want strawberries or?" He walked in from the kitchen holding a pan, and when he saw me, his smile vanished. Owen. The couple behind me shifted awkwardly, whispering something about coming back later, before quietly slipping out. I didn't say a word. My throat felt dry. My eyes scanned the room, his shoes by the door, her jacket on the couch, 2 coffee cups on the table. It was like a nightmare made of small, ordinary things. Lila stammered something about explaining, but I just turned, stepped out, and closed the door behind me. That moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like before. I was wrong. Before everything fell apart, life felt normal, almost too normal. I remember packing boxes, folding clothes, and hearing the faint sound of rain against the windows. Lila sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone while I talked about the new job I was excited to start. She smiled, nodded, and offered to check on the apartment while I was gone. It sounded harmless at the time. I didn't think twice. She asked a few questions about Owen that night, nothing strange on the surface. She said he'd been quiet lately and wondered if he was nervous about me leaving. I brushed it off, saying we just needed some space. But her tone was odd, too casual, almost curious in a way that didn't fit. I remember laughing it away, not realizing how wrong I was. The days before my move were filled with little things that I now can't unsee. Owen started keeping his phone close, locking it even when we were together. When I asked about it, he said work had been stressful and he didn't want distractions. I believed him. I always believed him. There was one night when he left my place after dinner, saying he needed to help a friend fix a car. I found out later that the friend never existed. Lila came by the next morning with coffee and a smile, asking if Owen had mentioned her. I remember tilting my head, confused, wondering why she thought he would. She laughed it off, saying she was joking. I didn't laugh. I didn't like the way she said his name, soft and familiar. Looking back, everything had a faint hum of wrongness that I ignored. I'd see Owen's name flash on my phone at odd hours, followed by a message saying, "Sorry, wrong text." Or I'd notice Lila liking old photos of us, leaving hearts and inside jokes. It felt like static, tiny, irritating, but easy to tune out. The night before I left, Owen came over to help load boxes into the car. He kissed my forehead and told me to trust him. I remember the exact way he said it, too firm, too rehearsed. I hugged him anyway. When I turned to grab my keys, I caught a strange look on his face, a flicker of guilt maybe, or fear. I told myself I imagined it. Lila came to wave me off that morning. She hugged me longer than usual. I told her to text me if anything came up, and she promised she would. She stood by my car, smiling as I drove away. I glanced in the mirror one last time and saw her still standing there. Now, when I replay that memory, I see it differently. Her hand wasn't just waving goodbye. It was a quiet signal that something had already begun. I just hadn't caught on yet. For a few seconds, everything around me went silent. The air felt thick, like the whole room was holding its breath with me. Owen stood near the stove, still holding the pan he'd been cooking with. Lila clutched the robe tighter, eyes darting everywhere except mine. Neither of them said a word at first. I could hear the faint sizzle of butter burning behind him. Finally, Lila stepped forward, her voice trembling. "May, this isn't what it looks like." The sentence sounded rehearsed, pathetic even. I didn't move. I looked past her and saw the apartment, the one I'd spent years shaping to feel like home, now twisted into something foreign. A pile of mail sat on the counter, none of it mine. My favorite blanket was tossed carelessly on the couch. 2 toothbrushes sat by the sink, blue and pink, still wet. Owen tried to speak, but his throat caught. "We didn't plan this," he mumbled. "It just sort of happened." His words hung in the air like smoke. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Every inch of me wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead I just looked around. The wine glasses on the table still had lipstick marks. Lila's shade, the deep coral she used for nights out. My clothes were folded in the wrong drawers, as if someone else had been living inside my skin. Lila kept talking, her voice high and nervous. "It's temporary, May. We didn't know how to tell you." She reached out like she expected forgiveness to come easy, like I might pat her shoulder and tell her it was fine. I stepped back before she could touch me. Her hand froze midair, trembling slightly. Owen set the pan down and rubbed the back of his neck. He couldn't even look at me. "I was going to call," he muttered, eyes fixed on the floor. "We didn't mean for you to find out like this." His words sounded weak, cowardly, like every lie he'd ever told had finally run out of space to hide. I didn't ask questions. There was no point. The truth was already written across every corner of the apartment. 2 pillows indented on the bed, a jacket that wasn't mine draped over the chair, and the faint scent of his cologne mixed with her perfume. My stomach turned. They both started talking at once, overlapping excuses, trying to make sense of the impossible. I barely heard them. My eyes were fixed on the window, the one I used to open every morning to let the light in. It felt dimmer now, smaller somehow. When I finally spoke, my voice came out steady, almost too calm. "You should both leave." Lila's lips parted, but no words came. Owen looked like he might try to argue, then thought better of it. I turned toward the door and walked out before either of them could follow. Outside, the cool air hit me like a slap. My hands were shaking, but my face stayed still. I had seen enough. I didn't need to hear another word. The road ahead of me blurred as I drove, the city lights melting into streaks of color on the windshield. My fingers clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The silence inside the car felt louder than any noise I'd ever heard. Every few seconds, I saw flashes in my head. Lila in my robe, Owen's face frozen with guilt, the burned smell of butter still hanging in the air. I kept driving with no destination in mind, just the need to move, to put distance between myself and that place. I pulled over near a small park, the one I used to visit after long workday. I sat there in the dark, letting the engine idle. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Tired eyes, pale skin, a stranger staring back. My thoughts drifted to Lila, to all the nights she called me crying after another breakup. I had always been the one to comfort her, to tell her she deserved better, to defend her when our parents said she was careless. I had given her my trust so easily, never once imagining she'd take something that mattered this much. I remembered the times Owen and I had invited her over for dinner. She'd sit between us, laughing too loudly at his jokes, teasing me about being the serious one. I used to find it sweet, the way they got along. Now every memory made my stomach twist. I felt stupid for not seeing what was right in front of me. A single car passed by, its headlights sweeping across my face, and I took a deep breath. I didn't want to be the kind of person who broke down on the side of the road. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. They had already taken enough from me, my trust, my home, my peace. I refused to let them have my dignity too. So I sat there, breathing slowly, until the shaking in my hands stopped. I didn't text Lila. I didn't call Owen. I knew anything they said would be another lie, another excuse meant to soften the truth. They had made their choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. In that quiet moment, a strange calm settled over me. I realized I didn't need to shout or seek pity. What I needed was control. They thought they'd broken me, but they had only given me a reason to think more clearly than I ever had before. The night air was cold when I finally stepped out of the car. The city was quiet, as if holding its breath. I looked up at the dark sky and let the chill sink in. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but one thought pulsed steady in my mind. This wouldn't end with me walking away. It would end on my terms. A week later, I reached out to them. My voice over the phone was steady, too steady, the kind that made Lila hesitate before answering. I told her I wanted to talk things through, that holding on to anger wouldn't help anyone. She sounded surprised but relieved, eager to believe that forgiveness was possible. Owen said nothing in the background, just a faint murmur I could barely hear. I chose a quiet restaurant downtown, one I knew well enough to feel in control. When I arrived, they were already seated. Lila had dressed carefully, her hair curled, a nervous smile frozen on her face. Owen looked smaller somehow, like a man hoping not to be noticed. I slid into the seat across from them and forced a smile. "I thought we could start over," I said lightly, pretending to mean it. The words felt like glass on my tongue. Lila jumped at the chance to fill the silence. She talked too fast, telling stories about their rough patch and how they didn't want to hurt me. Every sentence was decorated with guilt, but none of it sounded real. I nodded, pretending to listen, my hands resting calmly on the table. Owen picked at his napkin, eyes flicking up to mine then darting away. When the waiter came, I ordered wine, keeping my tone pleasant. I asked them questions, small things that sounded polite, but had edges hidden beneath. How long had they been seeing each other? Who moved in first? Lila's answers tangled together like wires, each one contradicting the last. She laughed nervously, said it was all a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Owen didn't bother trying to correct her. I watched the two of them like I was studying strangers. The way Lila leaned too close to him, as if afraid I might take him back. The way he flinched when she touched his arm. They looked like people clinging to something that was already dying. It almost made me pity them, but only almost. When the food came, the smell of garlic and butter filled the space between us. I forced another smile, steady and polite. Lila's eyes searched mine, desperate for warmth. "May, I know it doesn't fix anything," she said softly, "but I hope someday you'll understand." I took a sip of wine before answering. "I already do," I said. My tone was calm, almost kind, and for a second I think she believed me. The rest of the dinner dragged on in awkward pauses and half-hearted laughter. I stayed perfectly composed, every gesture deliberate. I let them think I was healing, forgiving, moving on. When we finally stood to leave, I hugged her lightly, just enough to feel her tremble. Owen didn't meet my eyes once. As I walked out into the cool night, I could still hear their voices behind me, whispering to each other, trying to make sense of my calm. They didn't realize that my quiet wasn't peace. It was preparation. A few days after that uneasy dinner, I called them again. My tone was light, almost cheerful, as if the past had dissolved overnight. I told them the company needed me to relocate again, maybe for a few months this time. Lila sounded thrilled, eager to believe everything was back to normal. I said I didn't want the apartment sitting empty, and offered to let them stay there under a short lease. "It'll help me out too," I added casually. "You can cover the rent, and I won't have to worry." She didn't even hesitate before agreeing. Owen barely spoke, his voice low in the background, but I could hear the relief in it. They thought I was handing them comfort, a roof, a second chance, maybe even forgiveness. I smiled while we arranged everything, though my smile never reached my eyes. Over the next week, I drew up a simple rental agreement, nothing fancy, but official enough to look legitimate. I told them I wanted to keep things professional this time. They both signed it without reading too closely. Every message they sent, every payment I received, I saved. Screenshots, emails, timestamps, each one neatly labeled and stored. They saw kindness. I saw evidence. I made sure to sound generous, even grateful. I told them I was glad someone I trusted could look after my place. Lila responded with too many heart emojis, trying to convince herself we were rebuilding something. I thanked her and pretended not to notice Owen's silence. When I met them to hand over the keys, Lila hugged me again. She smelled of my old perfume. I didn't flinch. I smiled, told her I wished them happiness, and watched the relief wash over her face like sunlight after a storm. Owen shook my hand awkwardly, his palm damp, his eyes avoiding mine. "We'll take good care of it," he said. I nodded. "I know you will." As I left, I glanced back at the building. My apartment, once my safe place, now became their cage. They didn't see the net tightening. They thought I'd turned soft. But every detail, every polite word, was part of a quiet design. I opened a separate account for the payments they sent, marking each transaction. I checked city rental laws late into the night, learning exactly how to protect myself while leaving them no ground to stand on. Each step was careful, deliberate, invisible. For the first time since that day, I slept soundly. I didn't dream of the moment I caught them together. I dreamed of paperwork, of signatures, of the calm click of every piece falling into place. They believed I had walked away from the past. In truth, I was walking straight toward their undoing, and they were the ones holding the door open for me. Weeks passed before the cracks began to show. At first, they tried to play house, pretending everything was normal. But I could tell things were unraveling by the tone of their messages. Lila's texts shifted from cheerful updates to quiet complaints. She mentioned bills piling up, repairs needed, Owen being distant. I responded politely but vaguely, offering no help. Each message went into the same folder as all the others, evidence of their unraveling. Then the calls began. Lila's voice sounded tired, brittle around the edges. She said the rent was too high, that Owen promised to take care of it but hadn't. I told her kindly that I'd check on it later, and never called back. Owen left one voicemail, his tone strained and defensive, accusing me of overcharging. I didn't bother replying. Behind the scenes, everything was set exactly as I planned. I had never transferred the lease. Legally, they weren't tenants, they were unauthorized occupants. The landlord, a man known for his short temper and strict rules, didn't take long to notice payments missing and names that didn't match the contract. I made sure he found out, though not directly from me. One forwarded email, one missing document, and the rest handled itself. The eviction notice came faster than I expected. Lila called again, crying this time, her voice trembling through the phone. They're saying we have to leave. May, you signed the agreement. I told her calmly that it wasn't official without the landlord's approval, and that my hands were tied. She didn't understand that the paper she'd signed meant nothing. It had only ever been a trap made to look like mercy. By the end of the week, their panic had turned into anger. Owen sent one last message, short and sharp, accusing me of setting them up. I didn't respond. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, watching as movers carried their boxes down the steps. Lila stood on the curb, wrapped in a jacket too thin for the cold, her hair unwashed, eyes red from crying. Owen paced beside her, muttering curses under his breath. The landlord was shouting, waving paperwork at them, his frustration echoing across the block. Neighbors watched from their porches, whispering. Lila tried to argue, tried to explain, but no one cared. The locks would be changed by evening. Everything they'd built on lies was crumbling in plain sight. I sat there, still as stone, watching through the windshield. There was no satisfaction, no joy, just quiet. I'd imagined this moment would make me feel powerful, but instead it felt like watching a storm die out. Still, I didn't move. I waited until they were gone, until the street grew empty again. Only then did I start the car and drive away, leaving behind the wreckage they'd made of themselves. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. Slow at first, then frantic. I opened the door to find Lila standing there, her face streaked with tears, hair tangled from the wind. She looked smaller than I remembered, clutching a half-torn envelope in one hand, the eviction papers. Her voice cracked as soon as she spoke. May, please, I didn't know what else to do. We have nowhere to go. I stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was quiet, sunlight falling in thin lines across the floor. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, wiping at her eyes, waiting for some sign of warmth. I offered her a seat, poured her water, every movement deliberate and calm. I could see confusion flicker across her face. She expected anger, maybe shouting. Instead, I just watched her. She started talking fast, words tumbling over each other. We made a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Owen said you wouldn't care anymore, that you'd moved on. I swear, I didn't mean to hurt you. Her voice broke again, but the tears felt empty, like they'd been practiced. I waited until she ran out of breath before speaking. Was it worth it? The question came out quiet, almost gentle. Her lips parted, but no sound followed. She stared at me like she didn't understand what I meant. I leaned forward slightly, losing everything for him. Was it worth it? Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears looked real. She shook her head, whispering something about love, about confusion, about how things just happened. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to say every word, to hear herself try to rewrite what she'd done. When she finally stopped, I said softly, "You know, it didn't start after I left. I already knew." She froze. "What?" "I found the receipts," I continued. "The ones from that hotel near the river. The dates were weeks before the breakup. You told me you were staying with a friend that weekend, remember?" Her face drained of color. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. The truth sat heavy between us, thick and unmoving. "I kept waiting for one of you to tell me," I said. "You didn't even give me that." Lila covered her face with her hands, whispering apologies that no longer meant anything. I didn't reach out. I didn't yell. I simply sat there, watching her unravel piece by piece, her sobs echoing against the walls. After a long silence, she whispered, "Owen said you'd never forgive us." I stood up, my voice steady. He was right. She looked up, eyes wide, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. I opened the door and waited. She understood. Without another word, she walked out, clutching those papers like proof of everything she'd lost. When the door closed behind her, the air felt still again, finally clean. A few days after Lila's visit, I ran into Owen by accident, or at least that's what he thought. He was walking out of a coffee shop downtown, his suit wrinkled, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. He looked surprised to see me, almost afraid. I gave him a small nod, the kind you give to a stranger you used to know. He hesitated, then followed me outside, trying to start a conversation as if nothing had happened. "Lila's gone back to her parents," he said quietly. She couldn't handle it anymore. His voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't respond. I just listened. He talked about losing the apartment, about how everything had gone wrong so fast. He didn't mention what he'd done to cause it. That part he always skipped. After a long pause, I said, "You still working at the same firm?" He nodded quickly, like the question made him nervous. I smiled faintly. "Good," I said. "I'm sure they'll handle what's coming." He frowned, confused, but I didn't explain. I didn't have to. Months earlier, before everything fell apart, he'd bragged about padding his expense reports. Small things at first: hotel upgrades, fake mileage, meals that never happened. He laughed when he told me, proud of how clever he thought he was. I'd kept quiet back then, pretending it was just another harmless story. But I remembered every detail. After I left him and Lila to their own mess, I reached out to an old friend who worked in the same office, someone who owed me a favor. I didn't have to exaggerate anything. I simply forwarded a few screenshots and let the truth do its work. Now, standing there on the sidewalk, I could see the worry flicker across his face. "What did you do, May?" he asked slowly. I met his eyes for the first time. "Nothing," I said, calm and certain. "I just told the truth." The following week, word spread fast. He'd been fired quietly, escorted out of the building before noon. His name was removed from the company roster by evening. No statement, no goodbye party, just a swift erasure. Lila called once more after that, her voice small, saying she was moving back home to get her life together. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I didn't feel triumphant or cruel. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. They had tipped everything out of order, and now it was simply right again. I didn't gloat, didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I just went about my days quietly, as if nothing had happened. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the way Owen used to smirk when he thought he was untouchable. That image had faded now, replaced by silence. I'd found something far better than satisfaction. I'd found stillness. And that was enough. Months passed before I returned to the apartment. The place smelled faintly of dust and new paint, the air still and untouched. The furniture was gone, the walls bare except for the faint outlines where pictures once hung. It felt both familiar and foreign, like walking into a memory I no longer belonged to. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, smooth and cold, the same one where everything had begun. Outside, the city hummed softly. The chaos that once consumed me had long faded. Lila was living back with our parents, working part-time, keeping to herself. Owen had disappeared from everyone's radar, a man trying to rebuild a life from ashes he'd made himself. I didn't look for updates. Their stories no longer belonged anywhere near mine. I had new tenants moving in that afternoon, a young couple I'd met through a mutual acquaintance. They were polite, soft-spoken, still in that stage of believing everything ahead of them would work out. When they came to see the place, they walked hand in hand, whispering to each other about paint colors and furniture. Watching them made something in my chest ache, not with pain, but with a quiet kind of remembrance. They reminded me of who I used to be before betrayal taught me how fragile trust could be. There was a time when I believed in promises spoken softly across kitchen tables, in love that didn't hide secret. That version of me had disappeared, but standing there, I didn't mourn her anymore. I understood her. She had learned. The couple arrived right on time, smiling nervously as I handed them the keys. The woman said she loved the light from the big windows, and her partner joked that it already felt like home. Their voices filled the space with warmth again, something the apartment hadn't felt in a long while. I stayed just long enough to answer their questions, then stepped aside as they carried in their boxes, their laughter echoing faintly behind me. I walked through each room one last time, checking outlets, doors, windows, little habits I hadn't broken. Everything was in order. No ghosts left behind, no traces of anger. Just calm. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the hallway that had once witnessed my heartbreak, and felt the quiet settle deep in my bone. When I locked the door, the click sounded final, not sad. It was closure, simple and clean. I slipped the keys into my bag and turned toward the stairwell. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, not happy exactly, but steady. As I stepped outside, sunlight spilled across the pavement, catching on the edges of my shoes. I paused for a moment, taking it in, then whispered under my breath, "Never again." It wasn't a promise born from bitterness, but from clarity. I'd lost what I thought I needed, only to find something far better. My peace, sharp and silent, the kind that no one could ever take again. Hey besties. Thanks for staying till the end of this wild story. Imagine renting out your apartment, only to find your sister living there with your ex. Unbelievable, right? But sometimes, betrayal becomes the lesson that shapes us into something stronger. If you felt that twist, make sure to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories that hit deep. See you in the next one. Bye.